This is Conejotako speaking, writing this after reading the chapter on stream and then rereading it alone. I would have liked to write this sooner, but I had a family dinner, and I think sometimes you have to switch up your priorities. Today's chapter was very interesting, although it's a chapter with the Dragon Ball Namekusei effect. What's that? Well, just like Frieza said Namek would explode in 5 minutes. Here, the entire chapter basically lasted only 10 seconds, but it was 10 seconds narrated in almost 10,000 words. But hey, I'm not complaining about that. I think my only complaint would be that sometimes the battles the author narrates are difficult to follow compared to other novels, but these are gripes that don't affect my immersion in the work. This chapter had everything. A power-up for Rem, Yae, and I'd like to say for Emilia too, but she doesn't need it because she's already broken. Still, she got a new technique, and now I'm worried about what will happen to Rem because of something you'll see coming soon. I was also stunned when I saw both Emilia and Aldebaran sprout wings and start flying. But well, we'll get to that. That said, before we begin, a thank you to the highest tier members of the channel. This time, a thank you to Shag, who it seems recently discovered ReZero and my channel along with it. Thanks for giving me the chance to join you on your journey through this beautiful franchise. Another thank you to Fishcake, who I was surprised to see has been following me for 10 months now. Thanks for the time you've spent watching my content. 10 months is a lot. Even my relationships don't last that long. Lastly, a thank you to TRAITOR, who recently subscribed. I hope you were able to find the web novel in its original language, and if not, send me a message on my social media, and I'll share it with you personally. Also, another thank you to the followers who support me through the English membership. Now welcome to the analysis and recap of Arc 9, Chapter number 50. One of the first things that caught my attention was a line from Roswaal, who asks the absent Subaru a question, saying he's going to see if the relationships the protagonist has cultivated will be enough to overcome his opponent, Aldebaran. Remember, this not only implies that Roswaal will be watching how Subaru's friends and allies handle things to rescue him, but it also brings up the question of what Roswaal will do about the contract he made with our protagonist in the second season. Remember that if Subaru fails to keep alive one of the people he protected in Season 2, then Roswaal would break the contract and kill everyone. Sure, I know some of you might say, but Conejo, that doesn't matter because Subaru is sealed, so the contract must be voided. I know Subaru is sealed, but so far no one knows if that's an impediment that would temporarily nullify the contract or not. The Margrave is aware of this ambiguity, and that's why he must be careful. If he breaks his contract right now and indiscriminately kills his companions, the terms of the agreement could activate against him, and he would be the only one punished. So, I imagine he wants to wait for an actual casualty before he starts killing his allies, confident that nothing will happen to him for this barbarity. But let's move to the other point of this section. Honestly, the fight between Emilia, Yae, and Rem is insane. I'd like to describe it, but doing so would mean summarizing the whole chapter, and I feel this type of video isn't a summary, but one where I just give my impressions on the chapter. Although I'll still share some feats that I found interesting. It's said that Rem and Emilia were in perfect sync to make Yae's life impossible. For example, Rem would throw her steel ball, and even if Yae dodged it, Emilia would kick the ball to redirect it toward the enemy. It's also mentioned that even when Yae took hits, she received them using a technique that allows her to redistribute and lighten the impact throughout her body. This allows her to better withstand the damage taken. The curious thing is that this technique isn't new. We saw a similar one when Garfield fought Olbart in the past. In fact, in that part, Olbart showed superior mastery of this technique. While Yae redistributes the impact across her body, I remember Olbart would redistribute the entire impact into the ground. This drove Garfield crazy because no matter how hard he hit the old man, the surrounding area would end up taking the impact. But back to the recent chapter, I remember laughing so hard at one part. You see, for Yae, it's a bit difficult to fight Emilia and Rem because the intimidation and information tactics she usually uses in a common fight don't work on them. Yae has a hard time fighting these girls because since Emilia and Rem are a bit idiotic, they don't usually fall for the provocations she uses on other opponents. For example, it's described how when she took a big hit from Rem, Yae pretended it didn't hurt. She hoped that this would make Emilia and Rem change their combat approach, seeing that their attack was useless and had no effect. But the girls didn't think that. On the contrary, they just kept hitting her harder. That's why I say Yae thinks the girls are idiots, and this idiocy complicates the fight for her. Another great and tender detail was the Subaru-shaped ice sculptures Emilia kept creating. These sculptures not only saved Rem from lethal blows, but also saved Emilia from falling off the platform. In fact, the girls get sad every time one of the protagonist's sculptures is destroyed. As I said, there are more tense moments like these. I only commented on the ones I liked the most, but if you're left wanting more, I'd recommend reading it for yourself or fuck it and watch a summary. But let's move on to the next section of the video. Something I found interesting was how this concept alternated between all the characters' points of view, moving from Rem to Yai and then to Emilia. But the most interesting part is knowing that it was a concept introduced by Rom before sending the girls into combat. The old strategist advised them to provoke as many variables as possible in the fight in order to eventually win through attrition. In fact, it was this concept that eventually led to all the girls in the chapter getting some kind of power-up. Let's start with Rem's power-up, which I think the poor girl really needed. We know that Tappei has always said that Rem isn't powerful. Yes, at the beginning of the series she seemed capable, but that's because at the start, Rem's rivals were random cultists or small fry witch beasts. Basically, due to the intensity of the moment, her desire to help Subaru, and the lessons she received from Priscilla, all of this caused her to sharpen her senses regarding her surroundings, which in turn made it easier for her to anticipate enemy attacks. Something worth mentioning is what Priscilla's classes for Rem were like. They weren't theoretical lessons, but rather phrases and questions that made the amnesiac Rem question her approach to magic. I remember Priska telling her things like she shouldn't approach an injured person thinking about healing their small wounds, but rather approach them thinking about how valuable a person's life is. This approach helped Rem's healing magic level up at the time, even reaching a higher level than when she had her memories. By the way, I don't know if you saw, but illustrations for that side story recently came out. That's because the author will soon republish this secondary novel, and whenever that happens, it's normal for the new version to have some changes. In other words, the author, being aware that the main story will reference this side story, has decided to rewrite parts of it for the delight of obsessed idiots like me who read the novel. Returning to the video's topic, now that Rem had a foundation from Priscilla's various lessons, she instinctively understood that she can feel the emotions transmitted through mana. And this helped her defend not only herself, but also Emilia from the lethal attacks Yai started launching. On Yai's part, she also receives a power-up in the form of combat techniques. I remember getting a bit nervous while reading the chapter because, out of nowhere, she remembered her training with Olbart, and him telling her to weaken her enemies made me think for a moment that Yai also knew her master's infantilization technique. I instantly dismissed it because, while this technique could revert Rem and Emilia to their child forms, it's a technique that operates on a delay and doesn't work for instantly killing someone. So, thank goodness that didn't happen. I mean, imagine we just came from an arc where we saw that technique for almost 200 chapters, and I have no desire to see it again so soon. In the end, following Olbart's advice, Yai drastically changes the battlefield and, combined with her mastery of steel wires, manages to replicate the concepts of IAI, which is a Japanese sword technique. Unfortunately, at the same time, Rem receives her power-up and begins to instantly counter the places where she felt Yai's killing intent, saving herself and Emilia from lethal blows. But Emilia isn't left behind either. The power-up she received isn't in strength or magic mastery, but rather she just learned a new technique which consists of making ice wings, though not for flying, but for gliding, because they aren't real wings. Like the other girls, she awakened this in a moment of need. It's said that Yai had launched a two-layered attack at her. One layer consisted of stone weapons Aldebaran had created, and the other layer was flaming steel wires. Emilia had to dodge it and save Rem, but it just wasn't possible for her to do both. So, it's described how she jumps and flies. For the latter, she had made the wings I mentioned earlier. It says she managed this thanks to a conversation she had with Subaru where he drew this design for her. Honestly, the fact that Emilia can simulate wings doesn't surprise me. I mean, the principle can't be that different from when she creates objects with specific shapes. What surprises me is that the text says this is a difficult feat. It's like, give me a break, Tappei. Emilia already has a good foundation creating ice sculptures. I don't think making wings would be difficult for her. Although maybe the author said it because, since the concept of wings was introduced by Subaru, she isn't familiar with the idea, and that's why she struggles. And just as the other girls on the battlefield remembered their masters, Emilia would remember some of Puck's teachings. Honestly, his words aren't relevant except for one part where he talks about Emilia inheriting the strongest genes. But this is no big revelation. We've known for a long time that the protagonist's father is an elf and her mother is a human. Maybe someone will say the genes have to do with Puck's identity, but getting into Puck's origin right now in this video isn't relevant, so I'll reserve my comments for now. But let's move to the last section of the video. The chapter ends with Emilia chasing Aldebaran, who was flying towards the geyser where he would throw Subaru, while Rem is left alone against Yae. Personally, I think we're going to continue with the Rem versus Yae subplot first. I think this because Emilia versus Aldebaran feels more like something that will wrap up at the end of the arc. Just imagine for a moment it would be anticlimactic to defeat Aldebaran first and then Yae. I think the correct order would be to defeat the servants first and then the final boss. Although I must admit, I'm curious to know when Roswaal's group will rejoin Emilia. While we know that this group has already defeated Alcanica, we must remember that the fight we saw today happened simultaneously with that. So if the author wants to, he can decide, just because he damn well pleases, that the dragon was actually defeated long after the events of today's fight. Anyway, we'll see what happens. Personally, I have a bit more hype for Rem versus Yae. Yeah, Aldebaran versus Emilia is a more entertaining fight lore-wise, but it's not a fight I enjoy as much because, as we've seen before, Aldebaran simply doesn't want to fight or harm Emilia. So we always see him on the defensive or running away, and seeing the traitor run away again isn't something that excites me much. Although before writing this script, I was rereading the side story called Guardians of the Crimson Flame. In that story, Aldebaran talks about how if certain conditions are met, he can activate a variant of his authority, a variant where the one who remembers the loops is his opponent. This has driven the two people who experienced it in the past to madness, one of whom was Yae. The side story doesn't make it clear exactly what those conditions are, but it's implied that it can also be activated regardless of whether Aldebaran decides to or not. It seems this activation also works based on the traitor's self-confidence, and since he's on the edge right now with everything being thrown at him, I think it would be interesting to see an involuntary activation from Aldebaran, trapping Emilia in an infinite loop from which she won't escape unless she mentally breaks. Obviously, Emilia is the protagonist, and she won't suffer the same fate as the other victims, but if this possibility materializes, I would love to see the outcome. The other remaining fight, and the one I feel is a bit more interesting, is Rem versus Yae. I feel it's more exciting because this fight will push the blue-haired maid to her limit. Remember that Rem is not a very strong person in the ReZero universe. While she seemed skilled at the beginning of the series, she really only seemed that way because her enemies were total pushovers, and she got to show off in a way. But now the power creep has increased significantly, and Yae is not just any prodigy ninja. She is the most prodigious ninja in her village. In fact, it was said that she was going to succeed Olbart when he retired. While it's normal to think the ninja will easily defeat Rem, we must remember that Yae is very weakened. She's coming off a loss against Wilhelm, has been fighting continuously against other groups, and hasn't been able to rest properly due to the schemes Otto has been pulling. In contrast, Rem has been sleeping for over a year, is in top form, and has just received a power-up that counters Yae's newly learned technique. With all this in mind, it's not so crazy to start believing that Rem might have a chance against the prodigy ninja. Although personally, I still think Rem will need another small power-up to defeat her, because the novel makes it clear that while the blue-haired maid gained an increase in sensory management, it also says this increase is only a small fraction of the mastery Ram had since birth. This means that Rem still has more room for improvement, and therefore, more possibilities for another growth spurt, while Yae doesn't show much more room for growth for now. Anyway, we'll see what the author has planned for us. This has been Conejotako, and as I always say, a like and a comment help the video more than you know. If you liked the animations in this video as much as I did, I invite you to see the latest creation from the animator I commissioned for the Gifs. I'll leave the link in the comments in case you're interested in appreciating their art. So tell me, what are your expectations for the next chapter? Leave your comments, and if they're interesting, I'll be sure to give you my point of view.